Welcome back, everyone, to the PA the FI Way podcast. I'm your host, Kat, and today we have a very special guest joining us. We have a CFP, Caleb Pepperday, joining us today, and we're going to have a really great conversation about what does it look like to work with a financial advisor? What does it look like to figure out who is a good financial planner to work with, and run through some case studies later today. So I'm really excited about the show. Welcome to the podcast, Caleb.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And before we dive into the show, I definitely want to point out that in the show notes, there's a disclosure there. Definitely read the disclosure from Caleb. It talks about how this is a reminder that this is only general financial advice, and we certainly can't go through specifics on this podcast or this discussion. So definitely treat this as overall general financial advice. It may or may not be applicable to you. So it's definitely something that you want to consider as we have this conversation. So Caleb, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and about how you decided to get into the financial planning industry.
Yeah, for sure. So I started off in college way back in 2014 in school, and I started off as a politics major. And I quickly figured out, man, I don't want to argue with people for a living. It doesn't sound like a very good career path. I had a few good mentors and actually a few good roommates that were really into personal finance. And I watched my grandparents really not grow up with have any money, even in retirement. They weren't able to pay bills. We would have to pay things for them. It was hard to watch somebody that's worked as hard as they did all their lives have to go back to work and do second jobs and things like that, even into their 70s. So that's kind of what springboarded me into wanting to help people with their finances. And what I've found is working as an advisor throughout the years is that there wasn't a whole lot of people out there that are working with individuals like my wife, who's a PA. So there's a lot of advisors out there that are willing to work with physicians, but it seems like a lot of times the advanced practice providers get overlooked, for lack of a better word. And that's kind of where I wanted to be able to come in and fill that void, so to speak, and have a voice for that part of the industry that obviously needs help with student loans and growing wealth and things like that. So just that's kind of a background of why I wanted to get started in finance and who I wanted to help. And really about 2 years ago, I kind of made the decision of, hey, I really want to lean in towards helping medical professionals and especially APPs. So that's why I wanted to start my own firm. I started Advanced Practice Planning to kind of bridge the gap between traditional finance and what's available for medical providers. So that's the long and short of it, and really why I wanted to jump into this side of the industry specifically. And we'll talk a little bit more about my practice and what it means to be fee only and things like that. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for sharing all that information. And to clarify, besides your wife being a PA, what other ways do you feel like that you are great at working with medical professionals, and what types of unique situations do you feel like medical professionals have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I like to emphasize is that I'm big on education, right? I always like to learn, even in my personal situation, whether it's finance or something different. And that's what I really try to bring to clients as well. A lot of financial planning, I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations, as I'm sure everybody knows, but a lot of it is also a little bit of an art and not always a science. So I actually did a webinar for a group of, I think, about 40 students yesterday, and we had some really interesting questions. The answer that no one wants to hear is that it depends, right? But as we kind of went through some of their questions, there might be 5 or 6 answers to a specific situation. What I want to do is be able to equip providers with the information to make good decisions on their own. And your decision, what you might do might be completely different than what somebody else might do based off of what you're trying to accomplish. So, that's a lot of what I do, a lot of, helping people kind of weigh out the different options and then, ultimately build a plan that makes the most sense for them. Because at the end of the day, it's personal finance. It's not general finance, right? So personal finance is personal. It's unique to you, and you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions for you and your family.
Absolutely. A great analogy is very similar to how we treat our patients. Whether they have a certain mental health diagnosis or physical health diagnosis, there can be several medication options to start. And sure, some of those things can have more of a cookbook type of algorithm or strategy workflow to follow. But a lot of those times you're having those discussions with your patients as to, hey, this is a medication option. Here are some pros and cons. Hey, this is a great medication, but it requires really frequent lab monitoring. Do you think that's feasible for you or not? So having those collaborative discussions with people is really nice and really great to do versus saying, okay, this is for sure what you need to do. Go do this, right? And they may or may not do that.
Yeah, for sure. I wish personal finance was a little bit more black and white, but it's part of the reason why I have a job, right? Is that there's got to be a way to kind of weigh out the nuances and make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more about the initials behind your name, Caleb. I'm sure you see lots of initials behind medical providers' names, but you are both a certified financial planner. A lot of people are very familiar with this term CFP, but you're also a chartered financial consultant. Could you share a little bit about what in the world both of those mean? What are the differences between them? And then why you decided to get both of them?
Yeah, great question. So really, we'll start with the CFP, right? That's the more familiar one. What a CFP is essentially, I kind of think of it as more or less the gold standard for financial planning. So what it is an educational background in things like estate planning, tax planning, investments, dealing with things like disability planning or social security, things like that. So what it ends up being is it's a series of courses. I think it took me maybe, I don't know, 2 years to go through the courses, kind of self-study, do it at your own pace. And at the end of each course, there's an exam. And then at the end of all of your courses that you've done, basically there's a big exam, right? So kind of similar, I would say, to somebody that's like a PA that's going through PA school. That's, their modules, and then there's also kind of the ending exam at the end as well. There's that piece, right? And then the second piece is you also have to have an experience requirement as well. So just because you pass the exams and have kind of done the book learning, so to speak, you don't get your CFP marks until you have at least 3 years of working experience as a financial planner or in that capacity. So that's kind of where it sets you apart a little bit from different maybe credentials in the industry, is it does have an experience requirement. And then it also has the fiduciary requirement of, anything that I do or I recommend has to be in the best interest of my clients first, rather than, best interest of me, and also benefits the clients. And so that's, I wanted to pursue the CFP first because, like I said, it's kind of the gold standard in the industry. And the reason that I pursued the ChFC after the fact, it's kind of a building block off of the CFP. So there's a few gaps within the CFP curriculum that, the CFP gets you a long way to where you want to be, but the ChFC kind of adds a little bit of clarity in things like planning for disabilities or planning for people that need long-term care assistance, whether it's long-term care insurance or long-term care, coverage in a home or something like that. So that's really on top of everything that comes with the CFP. That's the other piece as well. And I'll just add one more thing with the CFP. You also have to have a 4-year education, 4-year degree as well, which the ChFC you don't necessarily have to have that if you're just getting the ChFC on your own.
Okay, great. I appreciate you sharing the differences and how they help each other too, with you being able to work with your clients and giving them some perspectives and good advice overall. And next, I would like to share a little bit more about how in the world someone can figure out what type of financial planner or financial advisor would be a good person to work with. Previously, on a few different episodes, I've shared about how I had experience early on as a brand new grad with a quote unquote financial advisor who turned out to absolutely be more of a commissioned salesperson for a life insurance company. And at the time, he pushed whole life insurance, which was an expensive policy, and talked about how it was really a great investment, and also encouraged us to delay paying off our student loans so that I could more so put more money into this whole life insurance, invest a lot more. He never mentioned to open a Roth IRA, which would have been really great as early new grads, and then also never encouraged me to max out my 401k, just try to get that employer match. and never look into seeing if a HSA would be a good option or a high deductible healthcare plan that's needed for an HSA. So it was just overall poor financial advice all around.
Yep.
And we trusted him because another PA that I had met through my rotations had been working with him. So I thought he was a good person, thought it'd be a really great to get our finances under control, being that we were newly married at the time too. So that whole experience, once I learned about financial independence and learned a little bit more through self-education, made me really skeptical of the entire financial industry. And even those who call themselves fiduciaries. I know you touched a little bit earlier on the term fiduciary, but unfortunately that term absolutely does not always mean what people think, because so many people use the term fiduciary and they actually are not fiduciary. So if you could touch a little bit on that too would be helpful. But Caleb, for PAs or other healthcare professionals out there who've had a similar experience or just unsure how in the world to find someone trustworthy, what should they be looking for in a financial planner, and what types of questions should they be asking them to figure out if they would be somebody that would be a good person to actually work with and give them sound financial advice overall?
Yeah, really, really good question. I appreciate you sharing your story there and your background. What I would say is that it's like anything, right? There's good and bad actors in every industry and every field. And just because I guess if you're working on commissions, right, it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person or you're not, looking out for your clients. There might be, just competing motives, right, or competing, aspects of the job, right? So I don't do any sort of insurance or commissionable products. I'm what they call fee only. So I just basically charge for the advice that I give. But there are different, there's good actors on that side of the fence. There's good actor and there's bad actors on that side. And there's also good and bad actors on the commissionable side as well. So what I think that, people should really look out for first and foremost, right, is you want to make sure that you're working with somebody and whenever you go and talk to an advisor, it should be like an interview, right? You're going to be asking them questions. They should be asking you questions. You want to figure out, one, do they work with people like you? Do they understand what you're talking about, right? So I just had a consult with a prospective client that they talked to another advisor and they had no idea what PSLF was, right? So that should be a red flag for a medical provider of, hey, I want to work with a financial advisor, but they don't know anything about my student loans or how to potentially get those forgiven. So I think it's more along the lines of, one, you got to obviously know how the advisor's getting paid, but you also need to figure out, are they going to be able to help me with the concerns and the issues that I have in my own personal finances as well? So, and if they can talk about your situation and kind of give you a little bit of guidance and give you a little bit of reassurance that, one, they know what they're talking about, or you can even ask them to talk to other clients that they have. So I've done that before where, somebody that's, interviewing me to, be a client of mine, I'll say, hey, if you want to talk to other people that, are in the similar circumstance or have gone through my process, feel free, right? And they'll give you a little bit of an idea of what that looks like as well. So again, it's just asking a lot of the good questions, a lot of the quote unquote right questions, and to make sure that you're, the person that you're interviewing is, who they say they are and does have a little bit of background and education in what they're talking about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to take ownership for my ignorance and be naive at the time too, because I was actually clueless, truthfully. And I went to him with the goal of trying to pay off my student loan debt quickly. And then he quickly turned it around to, why is that your goal? You should focus on this and all of that too. So it was just a tough conversation where it felt like it was good advice at the time, but at the same time, I just didn't know the right questions to ask and to recognize too that it wasn't a great situation to continue going forward with. So I always encourage people to self-educate and always have their best interests in mind, because no one else cares about your finances more than you as an individual, not even a great CFP or any other type of financial planner out there. So always make sure that you understand and know what your goals are and figure that out for yourself too. Let's talk a little bit more about how financial advisors and financial planners can get paid in the industry. You talked a little bit about this, but let's walk through the difference between commission-based type of payment, AUMs, which is assets under management, and flat fee models, and what this means for someone that the financial planner, the financial advisor is trying to work with and trying to help.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit of a loaded question, right? So there's all these different ways that advisors can get paid, and that's why part of the confusion behind it is, clients don't really exactly know what they're getting themselves into. It's not like going to the store, right? And you pull something off the shelf and it costs $50, you know exactly what you're paying for. So I'll try to do my best to kind of break it down into segments here. But with a commission based, I'll call them advisor or financial professional, the way that they get paid, right, is selling you either investments. So there's ways that they can get paid basically selling upfront commissions on selling you a mutual fund or something like that. They can sell you insurance. They can sell you disability insurance, life insurance, things like that. They can also sell annuities. So it's kind of more of a protection of your assets situation there. And all those different items that I just explained, right? They're getting an upfront commission by selling you that product, right? So again, they could be good for you. They could, work out well for you, but you also kind of look under the hood, so to speak, and think about, man, there's a lot of ways that there can be perverse incentives with that type of model, right? So for me personally, I just felt that there was too many conflicts of interest on that side of the industry. Obviously life insurance and disability insurance are super important, but I just didn't feel that it was, in the client's best interest for me to be able to, on one side say, hey, I'm a fiduciary, but then also take that hat off and say, all right, here, I'm going to sell you an investment or an insurance product as well. So there are advisors out there that can charge an AUM based model, but then also sell you insurance on the side too. And it's nice because that can be a one-stop shop, but it's also can be an issue, right? Because there, are multiple ways that they could get paid, and there's, just a little less transparency, so to speak. So the other ways that advisors can get paid, like you said, the assets under management model. Typically, that's for somebody that's looking for an ongoing relationship with an advisor. So let's say you have $500,000 and they charge a 1% assets under management fee. Basically, your fee, roughly, assuming the account doesn't go up and down, your assets don't go up and down throughout the year, your fee would be roughly $5,000 for the year. And they can either bill that monthly or quarterly or semi-annually or however they do it. But essentially, that's how you pay for the service. So that, there's there's different advisors that will offer different things for that 1%. So some people might just be investment management. Some people might do tax planning, estate planning, retirement projections, and all that included. So that's another thing you want to ask an advisor, right? If they're charging an AUM model or an AUM style, what are you actually getting for that cost? And if it's just investment management, you can probably get that a little bit cheaper somewhere else. The third option there is the flat fee model as well. So the way that typically works is that you either get set up on a subscription model. So let's say it's $500 a month that you pay to have access to an advisor. They either charge you kind of a flat fee for the year. So let's say it's, you might get all the same things that you would under the AUM model, but they might charge you, instead of based on your assets, they might just charge you a flat fee of like $10,000 a year. The other way that, that I work with clients is that a lot of people just kind of need a financial checkup, right? To kind of see where they're at. So I just charge people, I do the AUM model for people that need more ongoing advice. But then the people that need, kind of one-off advice as well, I just charge a one-time financial planning fee based off of complexity. And typically it's a few $1,000s just depending on their situation. So that's a long-winded answer. And the reason being is that it's not as cut and dry of, all right, here's how this advisor gets paid. Here's how this one gets paid. There's a lot of nuance, and you just want to be aware of how your advisor gets paid. There's, the way I think about it is it's not necessarily good or bad, but you need to know how your advisor's making money.
Yeah, exactly. It's great to truly understand that and to recognize, what's the why behind it too, to feel good about it as well and feel like you're in a good working relationship with a financial planner too, if needed. So you touched on how there's lots of different options for pay structures. What type of payment model could a PA or other APP expect if they decide to work with you?
Yeah, great question. So like I said before, I have the wealth management model. So that's for clients that are a little bit more mature in their, in their journeys there. So a mid-career provider. So somebody in their, late 30s to early 50s that are kind of wanting to make sure that they're on track. And so we would do things like tax projections, maybe some retirement projections, make sure they have the right account set up, things like that. That's the AUM based model. That's my wealth service model as well. So I charge an ongoing fee out of the investment accounts that I manage, and that pays for all the services that we do. So that's kind of option number one. Option number two is if you need just kind of like I call it like a financial checkup. What happens is it's typically a 3-month engagement. There's some data gathering at the beginning, and we figure out what issues and problems we're trying to solve for, and then I'll develop my recommendations. We kind of work through those together. But the difference with that piece is it's kind of on you to implement a lot of those things because it's not an ongoing relationship, right? So I have clients that will do that because it's kind of like a one and done. I've also had clients that have done it 1 year and then, 6 months or 18 months later, they say, hey, I'd like to do that plan over again just to kind of see where I'm at. And it's typically a little bit easier for me because I know their situation rather than just kind of being a person that I don't know. So I try to make it as easy as possible to work with me. It's either, hey, let's do this ongoing, or let's do it as kind of a one and done, or a one and then pause and do it later. So
Yeah, absolutely. And both of those ways then are technically under the umbrella of fee only, correct?
that is correct. Yep. Yep. So again, I don't have any sort of investment commissions or anything like that. So the only fees that you would pay me is, again, the one-time financial planning fee or the AUM fee as well. And that's all available online and things like that you can look at. So
Sure. So a good rule of thumb for listeners could be to find a financial planner that is both fiduciary and fee only, but also vet a little bit further as to what those mean, because again, words can be used in situations where it's not really true. I know there are some insurance companies out there that say fiduciary and they're selling commission-based products. And again, like you said, well, is that always a bad thing? Maybe not, but for a lot of people, it's not always that they're giving good, sound, basic financial advice first beyond recommending certain life insurance products. And for many, term life insurance can be an excellent option over whole life insurance too. So fiduciary, fee only, but also learn to ask the right questions so you can vet someone too.
Yeah, I think part of the confusion, maybe part of the issue sometimes is that there are advisors that can be what they call duly registered. So you can do the kind of the fee only sort of, so to speak, of AUM, or kind of charging just a one-time planning fee. But you can also kind of take that hat off and then put your salesperson's hat on, and then also say, hey, remember those recommendations that I had in my plan? Well, hey, I can help you implement those too. And by the way, I'm going to make a commission off of selling you those insurance products. So the way that I think about being a fiduciary is kind of like a tailor, right? You have to, it's the fiduciary standard and then the suitability standard, right? So the suitability standard says, hey, if I'm going to go to a tailor, right, I have to get a suit that fits me, right? Well, if you work with a fiduciary, you have to get a suit that fits you, but it also has to look good on you too. So that's the difference, right? Of you want to make sure that you're working with an advisor that's not necessarily just selling you a product because it might fit your situation. It's got to be exactly what you need, and it's got to be, helping you for the long term and not just kind of the short term, sales piece of it.
Absolutely. And as you know, through this podcast, that I encourage my listeners to become financially literate themselves, to manage their own finances on the path to financial independence, to understand when they're potentially being taken advantage of, but also to figure out what their goals are and to really understand the why behind them too. And that is true for many industries out there, even medicine, right? We as patients, when providers go in as patients, we want to understand the why and all of that too. So it's really important that our listeners take the time to self-educate some. You don't have to go completely into the weeds of it, but to make sure that you become financially literate and understand what the basics are overall. At the same time, though, Caleb, I absolutely recognize that there are times where it absolutely makes sense that they want to talk to a professional, or that it's actually needed for them to optimize their finances over the next several years or decades to come. So could you clarify when would be an example that a PA or another APP out there may not necessarily need to work with you quite yet? And then also, who would be a good fit for you overall? Because I think it's really important that we try to differentiate that.
Yeah, good question. So what I've found is that, people that they'll have, they're kind of put into two different buckets, right? Of there's a lot of moving parts in their situation where it's not going to just be solved with one simple answer or, a couple answers, right? So what I see oftentimes is that new grads, right? The elephant in the room, right, is the student loan piece. But once they get that figured out, or at least semi figured out, a lot of their planning in the early years is pretty simple, right? Put money in your 401k or 403b plan, put money in your HSA, Roth, brokerage account if you have it, things like that. So what I find is that might be somebody that's great to work with an advisor that just does consulting on like student loans. So you might pay somebody, I don't know, 500 or $1,000 to just give you kind of the path of, all right, how do I, get on the right path initially, but I don't necessarily need ongoing advice here, at least for the next 5 or 10 years, maybe. Where I find that kind of it makes sense to have an ongoing relationship is one, whenever you are starting to make decisions that you feel uncomfortable about. So if it's a decision that you feel like, if I mess this up, it's going to keep me up at night or it's going to destroy my financial plan, right? Those are when you want to start thinking about able and willing to make these decisions on my own without having somebody kind of double check my work, so to speak. So I have a lot of clients that are busy working professionals. They have a couple kids and they are interested in this, but they just don't have the time to be able to dedicate to this and make sure that everything is getting set up right. And even the ones that do, I find a lot of times that they might get it 80% of the way there, but there might have been some, unfortunately, maybe some mistakes that they made along the way, or things that they just haven't done that they could be optimizing a little bit better. So that's kind of where I can come in and help. And then again, things happen, right? Job changes happen. Unfortunately, there's losses in families and things like that you have to be able to plan for. And then, once you kind of get closer to retirement, right, you got to figure out, all right, I've been getting a paycheck for, let's call it 20 or 30 years. How do I take the assets that I've accumulated and make that my own paycheck? And a lot of people don't really know how to convert their assets into income. So I help a lot of retirees figure out, all right, now that I'm retired, how am I going to get that $3,000 or $4,000 a month on top of my Social Security that I need to supplement my income to do the things I want to do? And that's kind of where, proper planning up front can, one, save you a lot in taxes, but also save you, kind of from making bad decisions along the way as well.
Absolutely. I also think a couple situations would be projections too, meaning if you do option A, option B, option C, what does that look like for your future? And then also, like you touched on, drawdown of those assets too over time.
Yeah. I'll give you just a real quick example. I was working with a client recently that is evaluating different jobs of one being a W-2 employee versus being a 1099 or contract employee, right? And it's not necessarily time bound. That might be somebody that's 30, that might be somebody that's 55, right? But one of the things that I was able to help them do is project out, all right, how much am I going to be paying in taxes in the different situations? How can I figure out a way to minimize that? And then also, what do I need to be charging if I do go the 1099 route to make it as profitable or more profitable than just being a W-2 employee? So there's things like that are kind of, not necessarily having to do with investments or trying to grow your wealth, that also a good advisor is going to be able to help you do.
Great. And also, just curious for the listeners, if they're thinking, hey, I might want to reach out to you, are you able to help PAs and other APPs in all the states or certain states? How does that work, Caleb?
Right now, I'm registered in Montana and Pennsylvania, and that means that I can have as many clients as I want to in those two states. I can essentially register in any state that I want to, but I don't have to personally register until I have 5 or more clients in that state, with the exception of a couple. So long and short of the answer is I can pretty much work with clients anywhere, and I work virtually. So once I get 5 clients in a state, then I technically have to register as an advisor with that state. But more or less, the story is I can work with anybody at any stage throughout the country.
That's awesome. That's great that you have that access to people that might want to work with you as well. And I appreciate all this information that we've talked about so far. Let's dive into a case study We're medical professionals that listen to this episode and we like case studies. So let's walk through a case study. Do you want to start with that, Caleb?
Sure, let's do it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of reading here to start to kind of paint the picture, right, of assets, income, things like that. So we're going to look at our clients here, Michael and Holly. So if you are an Office fan, you might get the reference there of Michael Scott and Holly Flax. But nevertheless, Michael is a PA. He's not an office manager. Holly is an NP. They have two kids, ages 8 and 10. Michael is 39 and Holly is 40. Their major goal is they want to retire at 55. They have a current portfolio value of $650,000, and we'll walk through how that's broken down between each person here. And they are saving money into their 401k/403b plans, getting a 10% match, or sorry, they're putting in 10% and getting a 3% match for their employer, making a gross income of $300,000 per year. So that's kind of the baseline, so to speak. So as far as assets that Mike has, again, remember he's 39, wants to retire at 55. He's got a traditional IRA for $100,000. He's got his current 401k that he's contributing to. That has $100,000 in it. He's got a 403b from an old employer with $100,000 in it. Holly has just one less account. She's got a 403b that she's working, her current employer, that's got $200,000 in it, and an old simple IRA plan with $100,000 in it from an old employer. They also have $50,000 in their checking account for emergencies and things like that. So whenever I'm looking at this planning situation, again, they've saved a great deal of assets so far, and they are putting a decent chunk of their paycheck away. So you look at 10% of deferrals into their 401k accounts. It's $30,000 a year, so it's nothing to scoff at, so to speak. And they're also getting a little bit of a match. But what I think we can do is actually kind of improve their situation a little bit more. One of the things that I would do as the advisor, and just kind of right off the bat, is I want to see with where the amounts they're saving at currently, are they going to be on pace to reach their goal of retiring at 55, right? And my guess is depending on how much they spend, they might be a little bit short. So typically, a client that is making $300,000 a year, they might spend probably at least $10,000 a month, and we need to be able to produce that with your assets over time. And again, the inflation piece is a huge piece of this as well. So $10,000 a month today is not going to be the same as $10,000 a month 20 years from now, 40 years from now, and so on. So some of the things that we want to be able to to think about here is that they have done a good job of saving in different vehicles, but all of their money right now is in pre-tax investment accounts, right? So there's a thing in financial planning, and Kat, I know you've talked about this on previous podcasts of tax diversification, Roth assets. They don't really have that in their plan right now, and they are kind of a little bit limited on being able to do that unless they have the Roth option in their 401ks. In their situation, right, they're making $300,000 a year, so they're in a pretty high tax bracket. I would be comfortable if they continued to make pre-tax contributions to their 401k and 403b account to get the tax deduction, right? But on top of that, I'd want to see if they're able to do the backdoor Roth IRA that I know you've talked about before. With their current situation, they aren't really able to do a backdoor Roth IRA. And the reason being is they already have IRA assets out there that are pre-tax. So there's a rule that basically says that if you have pre-tax assets, you can't pick and choose which ones you convert when you do the backdoor Roth IRA. You can't separate the cream from your coffee, so to speak. That's kind of the old adage. What Mike and Holly would have to do in this situation would be to take their old traditional IRA from Mike in this case, and Holly's old simple IRA plan. If their new Ks and 403Bs allow, you would actually roll those into those accounts, and they would have no more pre-tax IRA assets. Then you would be able to fund a traditional IRA. Again, you're not going to get the deduction up front. It's going to be non-deductible, but that allows you to do the backdoor Roth IRA. So again, for these clients, I'd want them both to be able to do that. So that's another $7,000 a year on top of the $30,000 they're saving already. So now all of a sudden we're up to probably close to, probably over $50,000 once you include the employer match. The other piece to their puzzle, and again, jump in. I'm probably just going to roll here, but feel free to jump in, Kat, if you have any questions.
Great.
If one of their major goals is to retire before 59 and a half. Well, they've done a good job of savings, like I said before, but the problem is all of their money is tied up in retirement accounts. And that creates a bit of an issue because short of having money in Roth assets, they can't really access any of that money until 59 and a half. So what I would talk to these clients about, Michael and Holly, is, all right, how do we bridge the gap 55 and 59 and a half until you can access your retirement money? And again, that's going to be probably a combination of Roth assets. It might be a brokerage account where you can access that money whenever you want to. So that would just be a general investment account. It might be things like real estate or rental income that they would have access to. It's not tied to retirement. The idea is to be able to bridge that gap that they can get to retirement, without getting hit majorly on taxes or penalties. There's also another item here, and we can dive a little bit into detail on. It's called a 72T distribution. And I'm not going to go super in depth into the weeds, but generally the idea is that if you are prior to age 59 and a half, if you start taking distributions at 55, you can actually do that from your most recent employer retirement plan. So if you have an IRA, you can't take money from there. But if you have an old 401k and it was your last employer you worked at, you can actually start taking distributions from 55 until 59 or until the time that has elapsed is at least 5 years, whichever is greater. And it gets complicated, but essentially you have to set up substantially equivalent distributions from month to month or year to year from each one of those 5 years. And once you set it up, it's kind of set up and good. But the idea is that you can get access to your retirement account or your most recent 401k and get those dollars, not pay the 10% tax on it, but you still are going to pay income tax. But again, that's another way to bridge the gap, so to speak. So a lot of people don't know about the 72T distribution, and it does get a little bit complicated, but it's something that is something that could be easily implemented.
Yeah, I have a clarification question on that. For 72T distribution, can that only happen at age 55, or can it happen earlier in the 50s or even 40s for people?
My understanding is that it has to, I think, is 55 for the general public. And if you work for a federal-based employee, I think you can do it at 50, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up.
And then could you touch on a little bit about another option, Roth conversion ladders, how that could be a way to access some of your retirement funds earlier as well if you are pursuing early retirement?
So with Roth conversions, basically the idea there is to get more money from pre-tax dollars into Roth. So again, at any point in time, doesn't have to be at 59 and a half. You can convert money from a pre-tax account into a Roth account. You're not paying the 10% penalty since it's not a distribution, but you still are going to be paying income taxes on the conversion. But the idea is, right, if you convert money into that account, you're going to have cost basis that you're able to access prior to 59 and a half. And then after 59 and a half, you can take money out with some exceptions, pretty much completely tax-free, whenever you need to. So a lot of times Roth conversions will make a lot of sense. So I have a client that is going to have a gap between they're going to take Social Security and then, when they're going to retire. So they're going to have lower income years that they're going to survive on just liquid savings, and will convert over that time period to lower their overall lifetime tax.
Yeah, and other years that it might be a good idea to consider. These would be maybe if you're going on a maternity or paternity leave, or if you're taking a sabbatical or a break between jobs, or you or your spouse are jobless for a period of time for the year. Those lower income years could be ideal to do some of those Roth conversions and say, hey, I'll take the tax hit now because this is a great year to do that because my income is lower. And I just want this part of the conversation to emphasize to people that you don't have to feel like all of your investments are completely locked up until your 60s or 70s, 80s or 90s, right? There are absolutely ways to access those funds earlier, or like you said, be creative and think about how you want to bridge that gap for you or you and your spouse as well.
Yeah, this is where personal financial planning comes into play a little bit more, right? So when you look at the typical order of operations, it's HSA, Roth IRA, and so on after that. But if you're trying to retire early, that might not be the right mix for you because you need to be able to access money prior to 59 and a half, and that tax benefit that you do get from contributing to something like a 401k might not be worth it in your situation. So again, most people it is, but if you have competing goals, that's where it comes. You need to kind of have a little bit of nuance, and there's room for interpretation, so to speak.
Absolutely. And then any other suggestions you would have for this case study here?
Yeah, again, we don't know completely their background, right? But just from a high level here, they have children's. They want to, if they are looking to pay for college, right? Something like a 529 plan probably makes a lot of sense for them, so they can save money tax free for their children's future. They don't have any life insurance, so again, with two young kids at home, probably getting a 10 or 15-year term life insurance policy makes a lot of sense. And depending on their health, they can probably get, if they're making out 150 a year each, I'd probably look at probably close to 1.5 to $2 million of term coverage each for each person. And that's probably maybe $100 a month for each. So if you're making 300 grand a year, you can swing $200 a month for insurance to protect your family. And, I've seen it pay out. I've seen, unfortunately, I've one of my friends is in his early 30s and has cancer right now, like lymphoma, or not lymphoma, leukemia. So it does happen. You're not too young to pass away, unfortunately. So it's things that it's not sexy, it's not fun to talk about, but it's reality, and you have to pay attention to it. So those would be the main things that I would say. Also, they want to make sure that they have their estate planning set up. So, wills, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, things like that. If they have two young kids at home, they might want to consider a testamentary trust. And essentially, what that the nuts and bolts of that are, gives a framework of if they were to pass away and assets go into this testamentary trust, they can kind of control the assets from the grave, so to speak. So let's say all of a sudden they do get $2 million of life insurance apiece, and they both pass away in a flight or something like that. Well, all of a sudden there's $4 million. And I don't know about you, but at 18, if I got a lump sum of $4 million, I'm probably having some fun with it, right? So having a testamentary trust in place will kind of prevent them from kind of blowing the money, so to speak. So you can have rules set up that says, all right, you're going to get 50 grand for a wedding, or you're going to get 20 grand for a car every 5 years, or whatever the case may be. And then you can set a long-term parameter of, if they're 40 or 50, then at that point in time, they can kind of get the lump sum. And the idea being behind that of, right, if they're not mature by 50, they might as well take that money and have a little bit of fun with it, right? So
those are all really great points, and definitely sorry to hear about your friend. That's certainly tough. It brings up a great reminder, though, that life insurance absolutely can be necessary and a great tool if you have people that depend on your income. So that certainly can be children, sometimes your spouse too. So absolutely get term life insurance set up if that's what's needed and that's the case. And it's just a great reminder that both my husband and I, we've had parents that passed away in their 50s and 60s. You just never know how long you're going to be here. So it's always a great reminder to take the time and the energy and the mental bandwidth to do these things. It's definitely hard to do and can feel overwhelming, but there are some professionals out there that are happy to help when needed, right?
yeah, for sure. And one of the nice things that I like I said, I don't sell insurance, but I partner with different, representatives that will kind of implement the policy for you. And you kind of know that they're most insurance agents, no matter what, for better or for worse, they get paid commissions to implement an insurance policy, right? But at least when you're working with somebody that's kind of sitting on the same side of the table as you can kind of take it to an agent and say, hey, here's exactly what I want. I don't need any frills. I don't need, a whole life insurance policy or whatever. Just literally implement this policy for me. And a lot of times that's going to take out 95% of the, conflicts and, getting into bad policies or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Caleb, to share all about this great information about what it's like to find a great financial planner and the types of questions to ask and walking through that case study. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure thing. And there'll be a few things in the show notes there, link to the website, and then just some freebies if anybody's interested. But yeah, it was great to be on the episode today, and looking forward to continued discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure to include social media links and your website and all the ways that they can get connected with you, Caleb. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.